A hand gesture. Simple. Slow. And the stage completely changed because Ace Frehley never explains, he only shows. The concert hall held 3,000 people. Detroit. 1987. The venue had seen every kind of rock show imaginable. The spectacle bands, the technical virtuosos, the showmen who worked the crowd like evangelists. Tonight they'd come to see Ace Frehley. Not Kiss. Not the makeup. Not the pyrotechnics, or the blood spitting or the flying through the air. Just Ace. Just the guitar. Just the man who'd spent 15 years being called Space Ace, and the guitar guy from Kiss, and never once stopped to defend himself. The stage was sparse. Amplifiers. Microphone stands. Minimal lighting. No costume. No theatrics. Ace wore jeans, a leather jacket, his hair wild the way it had always been. He looked like what he was, a guitar player who'd shown up to play guitar. The opening acts had finished. The house lights had gone down. The crowd was restless with anticipation. Ace walked onto the stage alone. No introduction. No announcement. Just him and his Les Paul, that iconic guitar he'd played for 2 decades, the one that had become as recognizable as his face. He plugged in. Adjusted the volume on his amp, checked the tuning with a few quiet notes that barely reached the first row. The crowd was shouting, screaming his name, demanding the hits, demanding the solos they'd heard 1,000 times on albums and bootlegs. Ace didn't acknowledge them. He simply stood at the microphone, guitar hanging against his body, and waited for them to quiet down. It took almost a minute. 3,000 people slowly, gradually falling silent because the man on stage wasn't asking for their attention. He was simply standing there, patient, until they chose to give it. When the last voice had faded to expectant silence, Ace spoke. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, completely at odds with the rock star persona people expected. "Someone asked me something last week," he said. "A journalist. Interview in some magazine I can't remember the name of." He paused, adjusting his guitar strap with the kind of careful, practiced motion that guitar players develop after years of playing. He said, "Ace, how does it feel to be known as the showman? The guy in the makeup? The cartoon character?" He said it like I should be offended. Like I should defend myself. The crowd was completely still now, confused about where this was going. "I didn't answer him," Ace continued, "because I never answer that question. I've been asked it for 20 years. Journalists, other musicians, fans, people who think they know what I am because they've seen me on stage in makeup." Ace didn't defend himself. He never did. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1973. Ace Frehley wasn't always the Space Ace. Before Kiss, before the makeup, before the millions of records and the iconic guitar solos that defined an era, he was Paul Daniel Frehley from the Bronx. A guitar player. One of thousands in New York trying to make it in bands that played clubs nobody had heard of. He was good. Everyone who played with him knew it. He had something, not just technical skill, though he had that too, but feel. The kind of playing that made people stop talking at bars and actually listen. But feel doesn't get you noticed in a city full of guitar players. Spectacle does. Image does. Being something memorable does. When Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons were putting together Kiss, they needed a lead guitarist. Ace auditioned. He showed up in a t-shirt and jeans, plugged in, and played. No theatrics. No performance. Just playing. Gene and Paul looked at each other. This guy could play. Really play. But he was quiet. Reserved. He didn't command the stage. He just stood there and played guitar like it was the only thing that mattered. "We're going to do something different," Gene had told him after the audition. "Makeup. Characters. You'll be Space Ace. The guitar hero from another planet." Ace had looked at them for a long moment. "Will I get to play?" "Every night." "Then I don't care what you call me." For the next 7 years, Ace Frehley became Space Ace. He wore the makeup. He played the character. He let Gene and Paul handle the interviews, the image, the marketing. He showed up, put on the silver and black face paint, played solos that became legendary, and went home. The thing nobody understood, not the journalists, not even some of his bandmates, was that Ace had never confused the character with the player. Space Ace was a job. The makeup was a costume. But when his fingers touched the guitar, that was real. That was him. That was the only part that mattered. When he left Kiss in 1982, the questions started immediately. How does it feel to not be Space Ace anymore? Do you miss the makeup? Can people take you seriously as just Ace Frehley? He never answered those questions. He just kept playing. Solo albums. Tours. Session work. He played with the same quiet intensity he'd always had, the same feel that had gotten him noticed in the first place. But the label stuck. The showman. The guy from Kiss. The cartoon character who got lucky. Musicians who should have known better dismissed him. Journalists wrote him off as a product of spectacle rather than substance. Younger guitar players imitated his solos but questioned whether he could really play outside the context of Kiss's theatrical machinery. Ace never responded. Never defended himself. Never explained. He just kept playing. Subscribe and leave a comment, because some moments only make sense when we remember them together. Back in Detroit, 1987, Ace was still standing at the microphone, his guitar hanging silent against his body. The journalist asked me how it felt to be the showman, Ace said to the crowd. And I realized something. He didn't want to know how I felt. He wanted me to be angry. To defend myself. To prove I'm more than the makeup. He paused, and for the first time since walking on stage, he smiled slightly. Not a performer's smile. Something smaller. More genuine. But here's what I've learned in 20 years of doing this. You don't prove anything by talking. You don't convince anyone by explaining. You don't change minds by defending yourself. He turned to his guitar tech standing in the wings. Eddie, bring me the Strat. Eddie looked confused. The Stratocaster? Boss, you're scheduled to play the Les Paul tonight. That's what? The Strat, Ace repeated calmly. Eddie disappeared backstage. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, unsure what was happening. This wasn't part of any setlist they knew. This wasn't the show they'd expected. Eddie returned with a Fender Stratocaster, not Ace's usual guitar. Not the iconic Les Paul that had become synonymous with his sound. This was a different instrument entirely, one he hadn't played in public in years. Ace took it, slung the strap over his shoulder, and turned back to the microphone. This guitar, he said, I bought in 1971. Before Kiss. Before the makeup. Before anyone knew my name. I used to play it in clubs in the Bronx. Small places. 50 people if we were lucky. Nobody cared about spectacle. They cared whether you could play. He adjusted the tone knobs on the Stratocaster, his movements practiced and precise. So tonight, I'm going to answer that journalist's question. Not with words. Because I don't do that. I'm going to answer it the only way I know how. Away from the spotlight, Ace made a choice no one expected. He raised his right hand. Palm facing forward. Chest height. Fingers naturally spread. The simple stopping gesture. The crowd went silent. Not the gradual silence from before. Immediate. Total. 3,000 people holding their breath because something in that gesture, something in the calm authority of it, communicated more than words ever could. Ace stood there, hand raised, for 3 full seconds. The gesture wasn't aggressive. It wasn't dramatic. It was just clear. Definitive. The physical embodiment of everything he never said in 20 years of being questioned and dismissed and labeled. Then he lowered his hand to the guitar. What followed silenced everyone in the room. He started playing. Not a Kiss song. Not one of his famous solos. Not anything the crowd would recognize. He played a blues progression. Simple. Slow. The kind of playing that strips away all the production and spectacle and leaves only the player and the instrument. Every note clean. Every bend precisely controlled. The tone of the Stratocaster singing through the amplifiers with crystalline clarity. It wasn't about speed or technical fireworks. It was about feel. About the spaces between notes. About the way a single sustained note could carry more emotion than a 100-note run. The crowd was transfixed. Ace's eyes were closed. His face showed concentration but also something else, peace. This was what playing had always been for him, before the makeup, before the character, before the questions. Just him and the guitar and the sound. He played for 4 minutes. 4 minutes of pure, unadorned guitar playing that proved every dismissive question wrong without him having to say a single word in his defense. When the final note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the crowd erupted. Not polite applause. Not the expected cheering. Something different. A sound that combined appreciation and understanding and something like apology. 3,000 people who had come expecting spectacle realizing they were witnessing something more fundamental. Ace opened his eyes, looked at the crowd, and nodded once. A simple acknowledgement. He handed the Stratocaster back to Eddie and took his Les Paul again. "Now," he said into the microphone, "let's play some rock and roll." What followed silenced everyone in the room. The rest of the concert was everything the crowd had hoped for. The hits. The solos. The energy. But it was different now. The audience understood something they hadn't before. They weren't watching Space Ace. They weren't watching the guy from Kiss. They were watching Ace Frehley, guitar player, doing exactly what he'd always done. Playing. After the show, backstage, a young guitar player approached Ace. He'd been standing in the wings during the performance, invited by the promoter. His name was Marcus Chin, a session musician trying to make it in Detroit's competitive music scene. "Mr. Frehley," Marcus said hesitantly, "that blues progression you played. The one on the Strat. I've never heard you play anything like that before." Ace was packing his guitars into their cases with the same careful attention he'd given them before the show. "I play it every day," he said quietly. "Sound check. Hotel rooms. Anywhere there's a guitar. I just don't play it on stage usually." "Why not?" Ace looked at him. "Because people don't come to see me play blues progressions. They come to see the solos. The hits. That's fine. I give them what they want. But tonight..." He paused, closing the guitar case. "Tonight someone needed to understand something. The journalist? Everyone." Ace picked up the case. "You spend your whole life being told you're one thing. The showman. The character. Eventually people start to believe it. And you have a choice. You can spend your energy fighting that. Explaining. Defending. Or you can just show them who you really are when it matters." Marcus thought about this. That hand gesture. When you raised your hand? What did that mean? Ace smiled slightly. It meant stop. Stop talking. Stop assuming. Stop asking me to defend myself. Just listen. He walked toward the exit, then turned back. "You're a session player, right?" Marcus nodded. "Then you already know this. Nobody remembers the explanations. Nobody cares about the defenses. They remember what you play. How you make them feel. The rest is just noise. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered." The Stratocaster Ace played that night, the one from 1971, from the Bronx clubs before anyone knew his name, stayed in his collection until 2014 when he donated it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It sits in a glass case now with a small handwritten note, Ace included. "This guitar never needed makeup. Neither did I." The journalist who asked the question never got his answer in words. But 3,000 people in Detroit that night understood what Ace had been saying for 20 years without ever speaking it. Real power doesn't defend itself. It simply plays. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Marcus Chun became a successful session guitarist. He keeps a photograph on his studio wall, a blurry shot someone took that night in Detroit. Ace Frehley, hand raised, stopping everything with a single gesture. Underneath, Marcus wrote, "He never explained. He only showed." That's how legends are built. Not with words. With one hand gesture, one guitar, and the quiet confidence to let the music speak.